Hello, everyone. Thank you, Carol. As I mentioned last night, as we enter this week where we celebrate gratitude, my favorite of our American civic holidays, I feel especially thankful to be here among friends like Carol, like Bill and Dick, whom I work with in connection with the National MS Society. And I'm grateful to be here with this group today with so many care partners. I'm also grateful to be here. I was asked by a friend, by Maureen, to come. And that's really the best way to get somebody to do something, as I think all of you know, to induce a friend to ask that person. Maureen, much like Randy, whom I mentioned last night, has always been an encouragement to people in the MS movement for her commitment to people affected by multiple sclerosis. So I'm very, very happy to be here. I come from Atlanta, and if there's any tension relating to the airline industry, I hope you will not hold that against me. I have nothing to do with that. And I am not as funny as Al Franken or as Norm Coleman, though as I read in the Star Tribune this morning, nobody thinks they're funny anymore, either one of them. And I'm certainly not as funny as Grant Watkins, because I never saw anyone, as Grant addressed us last night, use the sip from a glass of water to such droll effect. But some of what I want to say intersects with what Grant had to say. And I don't have as many instances of experience with care partners as Grant did, and not as my insight is not as deep as his, but we do intersect in some of our thinking about this. So I hope you will indulge me and let me talk just a little bit about my own story and the story of my own family with multiple sclerosis. Even though, obviously, I don't speak with the same accents as most of the people in the room. When I visit my friends in the MS movement in Boston and in New York and in Seattle, it's the same story. Clearly, I do not talk like a bachelor farmer from the exurbs of Lake Wobegon, but I think as we think about our experience with multiple sclerosis together, what we will find is that no matter where we're from, we have much more in common than different. The differences are superficial, the commonalities are very profound. I first learned about multiple sclerosis by observing some of the people who are pictured on the screen here. And all of these are my relatives in some form or other. They're not all my relatives who are affected by multiple sclerosis, but there's some of them. And I did want to comment on them because these are all important ones. All of the people pictured here, the people with multiple sclerosis, have had some difficulty with the disease that you certainly will not see from these photographs. But I chose photographs that did not necessarily depict these individuals in a way that doesn't show all of their personality, because these are truly whole people who have taught me a great deal. I first learned about multiple sclerosis through the life of Aline, my father's older sister, who's pictured here on the left side. That's a very old-looking photograph. I understand from my first cousin, Suzanne, who is Aline's younger daughter, that photograph was taken in the early 1950s, just before, the late 1940s, just before Aline and Kenneth were married. And Aline was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, according to Suzanne's records, in 1953. Now, you'll probably know, if you know something about the history of treatment of multiple sclerosis, that there really wasn't very much treatment available in 1953. In fact, Aline and Kenneth spent a lot of time going back and forth between the Atlanta area and Warm Springs, Georgia, which really doesn't make a lot of sense to what we know about multiple sclerosis. If you really think it, there is a warm spring there in Warm Springs, which FDR made famous. But that was what they were left with. I never knew Aline except when I saw her in a conventional wheelchair or lying in her bed. But I also never knew Aline unless she had a clear sentence or two that was extremely cheerful and encouraging to others. Now Kenneth was a hospital administrator with the Grady Hospital System in Atlanta, and when Aline was diagnosed, they moved from Atlanta to one of the suburbs, now suburbs of Atlanta, but it was out in the country then, so they could be closer to family. And they built what was then a nice, accessible, very simple house. And always I observed that they were very, very close and committed to each other. And that's part of the point that I want to make here. I've chosen these illustrations because they're illustrations that I happen to know about with some level of intimacy. I left out my father and my mother. My mother is really the care partner whom I've watched most closely. She's 81 now, and my father is no longer living, but I left her out, and I've chosen care partners who are Y chromosome care partners for a purpose, to make this point. But Kenneth was always dedicated. I said I saw Aline only in the wheelchair or in the bed. I almost have no recollection whatsoever of Kenneth unless he was standing there with Aline, helping Aline, except sometimes when he was telling Suzanne and me to cut it out, quit doing something that we were doing when we were younger. Now, in the center photograph is my sister, Lene, is her name, and her husband, Butch. Now, as you cannot tell from that photograph, but my sister's experience with multiple sclerosis over the last decade has been fairly severe. She's only a few years older than I am. Her experience with the disease is almost diametrically opposite from mine. We're almost at opposite ends of the MS spectrum. My sister was and still could be a very capable pianist, but for her multiple sclerosis. She was a teacher of English literature. She taught Shakespeare to unwilling high school students over many years, sometimes riding on a scooter around her classroom. But she is now retired.